Tennessee is the lone undefeated team in college basketball for now, but will that streak continue tonight in Gainesville against the Gators?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host for today's show, Andy Patton, and you are joining at the place to get your college basketball content every single day, Monday through Friday, 52 weeks out of the year. Want to give a special shout out to our everyday listeners and the members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord community, and give you all a reminder that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and if you use code Locked On College, you will get $20 off your first purchase. Well, it's a jam-packed preview episode today, as we said on the Monday episode. Not a ton of great games today. We did have Wisconsin taking down Rutgers 75-63, but we're going to spend the majority of the episode focusing on the tremendous slate of games on Tuesday, going conference by conference. We'll talk SEC and Big Ten in the first segment, including this fantastic matchup between Tennessee and Florida. We'll talk Big 12 and Big East in the second segment. Great game between Cincinnati and Baylor. Also some injury updates in the Big East to talk about. And then we'll close out the show talking about Pitt and Duke, Clemson and Louisville, and a few other games of note going on all tonight. It's a great day to be parked in front of the couch if you aren't planning to do so. See if you can find a way, because there's a lot of great games going on today. We're going to start in the SEC. There's 5 matchups going on in the best college basketball conference in the entire country this season. One of the best seasons a conference has had through the first half-ish of the season that we've really ever seen. I'm going to rattle off the matchups here, and we'll talk one by one, mostly talking about that Tennessee-Florida matchup. That number 1 Vols going on the road to take on the 8th-ranked Gators of Florida, who fell just a few spots after that very intense loss to Kentucky over the weekend. This game is at 7 p.m. Eastern time tonight on ESPN2. FanDuel currently favors Florida by 2.5. We also have that same Kentucky team going on the road at Georgia, also at 7 Eastern time on the SEC network. FanDuel favoring the Cats in that one by just 3.5 as the team going on the road. And that Georgia team has been pretty darn good, just like everybody in the SEC. Auburn, the second-ranked team, they're going on the road as well, taking on Texas at 9 Eastern time on ESPN2 right after that Tennessee-Florida game. FanDuel favors Auburn by 10.5 against the Longhorns. 14th-ranked Mississippi State Bulldogs also going on the road to Vanderbilt. So we got 3 ranked SEC teams playing road matchups against unranked opponents. Could be a very interesting day in that conference. That game is also at 9 Eastern time on ESPNU. FanDuel giving the edge slightly to the unranked Commodores of Vanderbilt, 1.5 point favorites. And then we got LSU going on the road at Dennis Gates and Missouri, 9 Eastern time, SEC network. FanDuel favors the Missouri Tigers in a battle of those 2 Tiger teams by 6.5. Obviously the headliner here, Tennessee at Florida. Tremendous matchup here. Tennessee has been so elite, really on both ends of the floor, but they have gotten to this point primarily because of what they have been able to do on the defensive side of the basketball. That has been a trademark of Rick Barnes' teams all the way back to when he was the coach of Providence in the late 1980s. This team is tough. They're physical. They're hard-nosed. They're holding opponents to an effective field goal percentage of under 41%, which is the top mark in the country. Opponents are shooting under 25% from 3 against them as of now, the second best mark in the country. This is a very, very good defensive team, but they are facing perhaps their biggest challenge of the season in Florida. I think you can make an argument that Illinois, maybe not as well-rounded of a Florida as Florida, but a very, very good offensive team, although that Illinois team is much younger than Florida. So the big question mark in this game is, can Tennessee's defense hold against a Florida team that just hung 100 points on Kentucky, one of the most efficient offensive nights that any team in college basketball has had this entire season? Unfortunately, they happened to go up against a team that had an even better offensive game in Kentucky. Kobe Bryant knocking down 7 threes in that performance. For Florida, the main question, how do they bounce back from a tough loss to Kentucky, a game where they seemingly did so many things right, but just weren't able to do enough on the defensive end to stop that Kentucky team from doing what they've done so many times this year. Mark Pope already picked up 3 wins over AP top 10 teams on the season. The key matchup in this game is going to be Chaz Lanier, the superstar transfer guard. We say Dalton Connect 2.0. It's a little unfair. He's not quite Dalton Connect, but he's averaging 20 points per game. He's shooting over 45% from 3. That is pretty darn good. If you told Tennessee that Lanier would be putting up those numbers at this point in the season, I think most fans would be pretty darn happy with it. How he looks against a Florida team that has a lot of length on the perimeter, that has a lot of veteran guards in Walter Clayton Jr., who's a tremendous athlete, a tremendous talent, scored, I think, 33 against Kentucky in that game on Saturday. And then Elijah Martin, former FAU star, had a really, really nice game against Kentucky as well. He's got a ton of athleticism as well, jumps out of a gym. So those two guys are going to be a challenge for Tennessee on both ends of the floor. You got Zakai Ziegler, who's very undersized, but has been tremendous throughout his career, averaging over 8 assists per game on the season. A lot to like in this matchup. I think it's easy to focus on the backcourts, Lanier and Ziegler and Darling Stone Dubar and Meshack and Gainey and everybody else on this Tennessee team, along with Clayton and Will Richard and Elijah Martin and everybody in Florida. But it's also going to come down a lot to the front court. How does Florida defend Igor Milicic? How does Tennessee defend Alex Condon? Ruben Chinyelu had a phenomenal game, particularly in the first half against Kentucky, the Washington State transfer big for Todd Golden and the Gators. This is going to be a really, really great game. If you're watching anything on Tuesday night, definitely check this one out. 2 top 10 teams. Again, FanDuel favors Florida by 2.5. So Tennessee's undefeated start to the season is very, very much in jeopardy here. It's one of those games where both these teams are so good and the SEC is so good that even a potential loss, neither team is going to be in significant. We're not going to have any panic about either of these teams. I mean, barring a catastrophic 30-plus point loss for either team, which seems very unlikely to happen in this game, or obviously injuries or anything like that, neither of these teams are going to be significantly set back by this game, which just makes it a really, really fun, high-level game for us to take in on a Tuesday evening. The rest of the matchups, not quite as exciting. Again, Vanderbilt favored over Mississippi State. That's definitely one to keep an eye on, as the Commodores certainly will look to play spoiler this season in the SEC, much like they did on the college football side of things this year as well. Vandy, very good team with Mark Byington taking over as their head coach from James Madison. This team's been very fun to watch this year. A little resurgence from A.J. Hogard, who spent the majority of his career up to this point at Michigan State, but is now having a nice season for the Commodores. Auburn should take care of a Texas team that has been kind of flailing a little bit. I just took an ugly loss to Texas A&M over the weekend. Kentucky, I think, should take care of Georgia, but that's another one to keep a close eye on, this Kentucky team. Like we said, 3 AP top 10 wins, has been phenomenal and played up against their opponents with those wins over Duke and Gonzaga, and of course this win over Florida. But we've seen them play down at times. I don't want to knock Clemson. They're a very good team, but that's a team that Kentucky, in theory, should have beat and lost to on the road. Georgia would be a somewhat similar situation for them as well. So definitely a matchup to keep an eye on, both that game and the Tennessee-Florida game going on at the same time. So definitely, if you got YouTube TV, you're set. If not, might need to find yourself a dual monitor to make sure you can catch those both. Only 2 Big Ten matchups on Tuesday, not nearly as exciting as the 5 games we're getting out of the SEC, but wanted to highlight these 2 matchups here. You got Nebraska coming off a really nice win over UCLA. They're on the road once again, going at Iowa, the Hawkeyes. That game at 8 Eastern time on Peacock. FanDuel favors the home team, Iowa, by 3.5. And then a ranked-on-ranked game. I think the only one of 2 ranked-on-ranked games besides, of course, Tennessee at Florida. That would be the 24th ranked Michigan Wolverines, Dusty May's club, going on the road to take on Mick Cronin, and UCLA in Los Angeles, 10 Eastern time on Peacock as well. FanDuel favors UCLA to win that one at home by 3.5 points. That should be a really fun matchup. I think I would be a little concerned about how UCLA is going to handle the 2 bigs for Michigan. We've seen this so many times this year with Dusty May's club, with Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden in the front court. It's just difficult to defend both those guys. And for UCLA, they got some size. They have some talent on this team, but a lot of their talent really kind of is in the backcourt, and they're not known. They're a phenomenal defensive team, but the size is something that I would be just a little concerned about with them. Eric Daly is a very good player, but he's like 6'8", 6'9" on a good day, just doesn't have a ton of size. So to me, I think Michigan is a team that could absolutely go on the road here and make the long trip out to California and pick up a W here with their backcourt, with their front court. But again, UCLA has played phenomenal defense all season long, and I wouldn't be shocked if they're able to find a way to really stymie this Wolverines offense and get a W, especially since they're going to be at home and not having had to travel as far as this Michigan team is going to get into this game. We're going to move on, folks. Cincinnati and Baylor, really exciting matchup in the Big 12. Both are not in the top 25 right now, but looking to get back into that mix as they square off in one of many exciting matchups in the Big 12 tonight. We're going to talk about that, 2 Big East games, and a couple of injury updates coming out of that conference as well, all coming up in just a second. But first, folks, Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so that you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of different tickets. Recently, I used Game Time Picks to get tickets for my dad and I to go to Purdue at Oregon on January 16th or 18th, I believe is the date. Very, very excited to go see Matt Painter's club on the road, taking on Dana Altman's team. Should be a really, really fun game. I found a really good deal on these tickets using Game Time, using their super deal, using their views from the seat, so you could make sure you know where you're going to be sitting at the game. Plus, the on-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee, complete peace of mind. This weekend, St. John's hosting Villanova at the infamous Madison Square Garden. Game Time currently has tickets available in Section 226 for just $38 a piece. And the super deal is in Section 119, Row 8, and you can get 2 tickets for $107 a piece. Check out the views from their seat feature. It is a phenomenal view of what should be a super high-level basketball game this Saturday. So, folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets by using Game Time. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast, and we are still previewing an electric slate of games taking place tonight on Tuesday. We talked about the 5 SEC matchups headlined by Florida and Tennessee. We also talked about a pair of Big Ten matchups, including the only other ranked game with Michigan going on the road to take on UCLA. Now we got 5 Big 12 games and a pair of Big East games to talk about here before we get to the final segment, talking some ACC and a few other games around the college basketball space. Big 12 games, here are the 5 that we have taking place tonight. Arizona going on the road all the way out to those country roads in Morgantown, West Virginia, to take on the Mountaineers. 7 Eastern time on ESPN Plus. Unfortunately, every one of these games is on ESPN Plus, so hopefully that's a place you're able to watch some games. FanDuel favors Arizona, the road team, the unranked team, by 2.5. Then you got Utah going on the road to take on Iowa State and Ames, 8 Eastern time on ESPN Plus. Unsurprisingly, the largest line that we're going to talk about today, Iowa State favored over Utah by 18.5. And then that aforementioned game, Cincinnati at Baylor, 2 teams that have been ranked for most of the year but are not currently ranked. That game at 8 Eastern time on ESPN Plus as well. FanDuel favors the home Baylor Bears by 5.5. And you got Kansas State at Oklahoma State at 8 Eastern time. FanDuel favors Oklahoma State, by 1.5. And then Texas Tech going on the road to take on BYU at the Marriott Center, 9 Eastern time on ESPN Plus. FanDuel favors the Cougars by 3.5. Lots of really good games here, even though we only have 2 actual ranked teams playing. I will start Arizona at West Virginia. Again, a little surprising to see FanDuel favor the Wildcats in this one. West Virginia is now in the top 25 after that massive win over Kansas. They've played some really good basketball. And folks, these 2 teams have already played each other. One of my favorite facts about this season, we've seen this now twice, with Iowa State having played Colorado twice, and with Arizona having about to play West Virginia a second time. The reasoning being that these MTEs that were scheduled ahead of time when Arizona and Colorado were both in the Pac-12, they honored the fact that those teams were not in the same conference when they originally scheduled to be in those MTEs. So they're allowing them to play. It's very unique when you look at Iowa State's their net rankings, and you see that they have 2 quad 1 wins. Both are over Colorado. One's a neutral, one's a home. It's just strange to see that. But for Arizona, West Virginia, they're already familiar with each other. West Virginia already got a W here. Now they're at home, and Arizona is the favored team. Obviously, this Arizona team had super high expectations coming into the season, whereas West Virginia did not. People did not know what to make of Darren DeVries, and this West Virginia team now missing Tucker DeVries, Darren's son, out with an injury. So I can understand why Arizona's favored, but West Virginia beat Kansas without DeVries, so certainly they are a team not to be messed with here. If there was a line on here that I might be smashing some money down on, I think I'm taking West Virginia to cover that spread, if not win this thing outright against the Wildcats. Don't need to spend a lot of time on Utah at Iowa State or, frankly, Kansas State at Oklahoma State. We'll see if Jerome Tang can go pick up a road win over the Pokes. But Cincinnati at Baylor is a game that definitely intrigues me here. Two teams that had super high expectations coming into the year, and neither have been like outright bad, but neither have met the expectations that many folks had for them. Cincinnati's a team that's very baffling. They have some massive wins. They have some questionable losses. Baylor had that blowout loss to Gonzaga early in the year. They lost to an Arkansas team that hasn't aged super well, as Arkansas has been. Not surprisingly, a bit inconsistent under Coach Calipari, but this Baylor team, when they're on, they're very, very good. Norchad Omier going up against Aziz Bendago and the rest of that Cincinnati front court should be a really, really fun matchup. Cincinnati returns all of their starters from last year. Lots of roster continuity, not the case for Baylor, as they've been dealing with trying to kind of acclimate their new faces with Jeremy Roach coming over from Duke and Omier coming over from Miami, as well as superstar freshman VJ Edgecombe, who's been elite defensively, but hasn't quite fit the bill offensively, hasn't been as impactful on that end as certainly as Scott Drew and the Baylor fans would have hoped that he would be at this point. But they're at home. I think they're the more talented roster, but Cincinnati is a great team. They have more continuity. They're a very well-coached team under Wes Miller. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if Cincinnati goes out and gets themselves the kind of road win that should get them back in the top 25, depending how the rest of the week goes for them. But Baylor's favored by 5.5. I like that line for them. I think that they are, again, the better team, and they're at home, so they should probably win this one. It's going to start feeling a little bit, I don't want to say panicky. I don't think losing to Cincinnati should cause panic for Baylor fans, but they're not going to be happy if they don't win this one. Anytime you don't beat an unranked opponent at home, you're going to feel a little questionable about it. But this Baylor team still got a lot of time to right the ship, but both these teams are kind of in a similar position, so this should make this a very exciting game to take in tonight. Texas Tech at BYU is going to have some intrigue as well. Don't want to spend a ton of time there, but JT Toppin going up against this BYU front court with Fusini Traore and Keba Kaita and Kenan Catchings. There's a lot of interest in that game as well. I'm excited to see how these two teams with two very, very good coaches, offensive-minded coach in Kevin Young for the Cougars and a defensive-minded coach in Grant McCaslin for the Red Raiders. That one should be very fun. BYU is a really tough team to beat when they are in the Marriott Center, so I'm giving the edge to BYU. I think they win. I think they cover that 3.5-point spread, but that's going to be a fun game as well. Two Big East matchups here to close out the segment. We're also going to talk about a few injury updates in the Big East. First, you got St. John's, Rick Pitino's team going on the road to take on Xavier, 6:30 Eastern time tonight on FS1. FanDuel favors the road Johnnies by 1.5. And then you got Georgetown going on the road to take on Marquette, 7th-ranked Golden Eagles, 8 Eastern time on the CBS Sports Network. Another big line here as Marquette favored a little higher than I thought, 12.5 points. This Georgetown team has been pretty good. Now, Marquette is obviously better, and they are at home, and they should win this game, and they should probably win it by double digits. But I was kind of expecting more like an 8.5 point line just because of how Georgetown has played recently. But this Marquette team really rolling as of late. They're a very, very good club. Cam Jones, first team All-American caliber player at this point, has looked absolutely fantastic. Going to be a very, very tough matchup for this Hoyas team. But Thomas Sorber has been one of the best kind of unheralded young players in the entire country for Ed Cooley and the Hoyas, and I'm excited to see how he looks against this Marquette front line. Couple updates here since we're talking Marquette. We'll start with this one. Sean Jones, who has not played yet this season. In fact, he has not played since he suffered an injury against Butler on January 10th, 2024. So almost exactly 1 year ago, he suffered a torn ACL. He is still recovering, and it was recently announced by the school that he is going to redshirt this season as he continues to recover. Shaka had indicated that he was doing live 5-on-5 drills back in November, so there was some hope that he would be back for the second half of the season. That is no longer the case. He will have 2 years of eligibility after this year. Jones averaged just under 6 points, 2 assists, and 1.5 rebounds in 16 games last year, playing about 16 minutes per night. So the not so good news for them in terms of getting some help this season for a team that has Elite Eight, Final Four aspirations, but 2 more years of Sean Jones, he's going to be a very good piece for this team in the next couple of seasons. And then Liam McNeely, we already discussed that he got injured in that game against DePaul and has been out for a little bit with that. They did an MRI. It is a high ankle sprain for McNeely. Dan Hurley said on Saturday that he could return maybe in late January. So if it's not late January, expect it to be sometime in the early part of February. Dan Hurley's specific quote was weeks, not days, for McNeely. So that is very unfortunate for the superstar freshman who's been playing. He's been playing well all year, but he was really picking it up towards the end of the season or towards the end of the calendar year 2024. All told, at this point in the season, McNeely averaging 13.5 points, 5.8 boards, shooting 38% from three. Jalen Stewart in particular going to have to step up for the Huskies. Next man up mentality has been a hallmark of Dan Hurley's team the last few years, and it's going to be tested here without McNeely for the lion's share of conference play, at least for the next couple of weeks. Well, folks, can Louisville continue their hot start to conference play as they host Clemson at the KFC Yum Center tonight? That and more from the ACC coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, from big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets whether you win or lose. And the FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. We already talked quite a few lines today, and I already mentioned this one, but I'm going to mention it again here. I'm not sold that Arizona can go out to Morgantown and beat West Virginia, even without DeVries in the mix. They didn't win on a neutral site. I don't think that they go out and win on the road. So give me West Virginia to cover that 2.5 point spread. If there's a money line, maybe give me that as well for this West Virginia team. If you like that line, if you like any of the other lines we've talked about, or the 5-6 other lines we're going to talk about here to close out the show, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. As a reminder, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, folks, 6 more games on Tuesday to close out the show. That is right. It is a jam-packed Tuesday slate of games. We were not kidding. We got multiple games in every high major conference to talk about today. We also got a few out of the Mountain West, or one out of the Mountain West, one out of the WCC to close us out. But we'll start with 4 games taking place in the ACC today, starting with Pitt going on the road at Cameron Indoor to take on the 4th-ranked Blue Devils of Duke. 7 Eastern time for that game on ESPN. FanDuel favors Duke 13.5, another one of the bigger lines that we're seeing for tonight. We also have Georgia Tech at Syracuse, also at 7 Eastern time. That one's on the ACC network. FanDuel favors the home team, the Orange, by 1.5. Clemson at Louisville, also at 7. That one's on ESPNU. FanDuel favors the home team, the Cardinals, by 3.5. And then last but not least, SMU going on the road to Chapel Hill to take on the Tar Heels of North Carolina, currently unranked. 9 Eastern time for that one on the ACC network. FanDuel favors North Carolina by 6.5. 2 games that really stand out here in this slate, with apologies to SMU at North Carolina. Really hope the Tar Heels can take care of this one, but they have really struggled against basically every high major opponent that they have faced this season. Georgia Tech at Syracuse, not one of the least interesting high major games. With apologies to both teams, they're just not playing very well this year, and I don't expect that game to cause a lot of fireworks. But the 2 that really stand out here, Pitt at Duke, Clemson at Louisville, obviously for Duke, continuing to be one of the best teams in the country. We talked about it on Monday's show. Tennessee, Auburn, and Iowa State are certainly getting the majority of the conversation around being the best team in college basketball, but Duke absolutely right in that conversation with the way they have played this season. I will be hosting the Locked On Blue Devils podcast after this game, folks. For those of you who have been listening, JJ Jackson, the phenomenal host of Locked On Blue Devils, he's on a multi-week vacation, and myself, Isaac Shade, are my co-host for this show, as well as Leaf Tulane, our regular guest, and now the host of the Locked On College Basketball Game Night Show, which is live every Saturday. The 3 of us each took 1 episode of Locked On Blue Devils while JJ was out of town, so mine will be tonight's game, tomorrow's episode. So if you listen to Locked On Blue Devils, you will see a familiar face recapping that game between Duke and Pitt. Should be a really fun one to see how Duke is able to play at home in the ACC. They're favored in every game in conference play going forward, and they should be. They're the only ranked team in the conference, and they're a top 5 team in the country. So Pitt beat Duke last year. This is certainly, Jeff Capel is very, very capable of winning this basketball game against the Cameron Crazies and Duke. So that's going to be a really, really fun one. But the game I'm most excited about in the ACC is definitely this Clemson-Louisville matchup. Louisville has won all of their conference games by 10 or more points. They beat North Carolina, which was a nice win for them. I know Carolina hasn't played all that great, but that's still a big win for Pat Kelce's club. This team kind of got out of the gates a little slow. They lost Kaysen prior to the season-ending injury, which was really brutal for them. But now with Abubakar Traore back in the mix and healthy, this team has been very, very good as of late. Chucky Hepburn looks like a potential All-American candidate at the point guard position. He's shooting the ball well. He's taken on a bigger role offensively than he had at Wisconsin. He's getting a ton of steals. He's just playing some really good ball right now. Javon Hadley's been good. Terrence Edwards been good. Rain Smith coming off the bench, transfer from Charleston, followed Coach Kelce to Louisville. He's been one of the best sharpshooters in the country. So this is a team that Louisville's made some noise already in the ACC, but beating Clemson, that's when you're going to really start to make some noise. This Clemson team has been in the top 25. They beat Kentucky at home. They got some really good wins this year. This should be a fun matchup. To me, the big X factor in this game is Ian Shefflin, the chef for Clemson. He has absolutely beat up on teams that don't have a ton of size and physicality. I think he had 20 or 21 rebounds against Kentucky earlier this season. Louisville, not a team that has a ton of physicality, not a team that has a ton of size. Their bigs tend to be floor spacers. They don't have a lot of bangers down on the block. I think Ian Shefflin, he comes out, he has a monster game. He does what he's capable of doing, 15 and 15 type stuff. I think it's hard for Louisville to win, even if they're the home team. But if Sheff is off, if he's not having a great game, absolutely could be a game that goes to Louisville. This is a really intriguing game, and the kind of game where if Louisville wins, especially if they win by double digits like they've been doing in the ACC, we're starting to have a different conversation about Louisville. Not necessarily top 25 yet, but certainly like, hey, not only is this the best season that they've had since Kenny Payne, clearly, but I mean, we're already at that point, but we start talking about Louisville as a legitimate NCAA tournament caliber team. I think that conversation is starting, and we're starting to hear rumblings of it, but you beat Clemson, they're going to get real loud. Those conversations are going to be absolutely out there, and completely justifiably so for Pat Kelce's team. I'm a big fan of Pat Kelce. I love what he did at Charleston. I love his energy, his enthusiasm. This roster was a little bit chaotic. They had to replace an entire team. They had a lot of money in the transfer, or a lot of money to spend in the transfer portal, so they got some talent, but we've seen this with other teams, cough, cough, Indiana, cough, cough, Kansas State, who haven't really met the expectations. I know Indiana hasn't lost a ton of bad games, but they haven't played particularly impressively with the group that they have. Kansas State has just flat out not been good at times this season. I know they got that nice win over Cincy, but Louisville has done well with the pieces they have, and especially when you consider the injuries that they've had to deal with early in the year already. I'm very impressed with what Pat Kelce has done. And I think a win over Clemson really starts to put them even more back in the national conversation, which the ACC just desperately needs somebody to be in the national conversation for a positive reason, because right now it's Duke, and that's about it in terms of positive press for ACC on the hoop side of things. Two other games to mention here somewhat quickly. The non-power conference teams, or non-power conference games that stand out on Tuesday. This almost ended up being a Pac-12 section because it was UNLV at Boise State. Boise State obviously joining the new Pac-12 starting in the 26th season. And then LMU at St. Mary's. Obviously, St. Mary's not in neither team in the Pac-12. St. Mary's been rumored to get a potential invite to that Pac-12 in 2026. We'll see if that comes together or not. The first game here, the Mountain West game, UNLV at Boise State, 10:30 Eastern time on FS1. FanDuel favors the Broncos by 7.5 points. LMU going on the road at St. Mary's, 11 Eastern time on ESPN2. FanDuel favors the Gales by 12.5. I think both those are pretty solid lines. LMU, 2 games ago, had a 21-point home victory over Oregon State. I think Oregon State was favored in that game. So for LMU to beat them by 21 points was a resounding statement that this team is ready to hold steady at home and pick up wins against some of the marquee WCC teams. Then the next game they played was against Gonzaga, and Gonzaga quickly quieted that, beating them by 28 points, hung 96 on them in a home game for LMU. So LMU is playing a little pissed off. They're going out to Moraga to take on a St. Mary's team that has not played any competitive teams yet in the WCC. I believe they've beaten up on Portland, Pepperdine, and Pacific are the 3 games that they have played. So haven't really gleaned a whole lot about St. Mary's since conference play began, but we'll learn a little bit more about Randy Bennett's club with this matchup against the Lions. Boise State should hold steady against UNLV. Leon Rice's teams have typically played very, very well in January. I expect that to continue. I expect them to get a win. They're a tough team to play at home. I expect Tyson Degenhart and this Boise State team to pick up a nice W here on Tuesday. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Isaac and Leaf will be back with you all on Wednesday to recap all of this excitement, all of these fantastic matchups. Also look for yours truly on the Locked On Blue Devils podcast, filling in for the great JJ Jackson after this Pitt Duke matchup takes place. Then we're going to have some more great shows for you Thursday, Friday. And again, mentioned this already, but I'll throw it out there again. Locked On College Basketball Game Night. We'll have our second episode on Saturday evening after the games have concluded. Leaf Tulane, our regular guest, is going to be the full-time host of that Locked On College Basketball show, getting you all the action on Saturday, what it means, what happened in each game, all that stuff. Definitely check it out. It'll be in your feed, just like all the rest of the shows on YouTube, on whatever your preferred podcast platform is. Thanks again for listening, folks. As always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats. And until Wednesday, peace out.